Just recently, I was subbing in an orchestra class, and I chose that class because I love to hear live music. It's just amazing just how talented these young people are. Now, I was as the students were playing, I was looking at a sheet of music, and it was just amazing that from this sheet of music came those wonderful sounds that everyone in the classroom was making. And like as I was trying to make sense of everything that I was looking at, something came to my mind. Something hit me right between the eye because as I was looking at that sheet of music, I was overwhelmed by the thought of trying to make sense of it all, by my futile attempts to try to make sense of it all and just try to find out where they were. And the revelation that hit me right between the eyes, and this is what I want to share with you, is just that could this be the psychology that goes through the mind of a student when they're going to quit or they're thinking about giving subpar effort? And it's important to understand that, because if you understand that and you're a trusted source uh, when it comes to motivating a student who lacks the motivation. So think of it like this. Think of it like a doctor. You want to be able to go to a doctor who is a trusted source. You want to be able to go to a doctor who can actually speak to the symptoms that you're experiencing or hear the symptoms that you're experiencing and be able to quickly and confidently diagnose what's going on and state the solution. You become a trusted source, and that's why it's important. It's important to understand the psychology of what's going through the mind of a student who lacks the appropriate level of motivation. You need to understand that because a lot of the you're going to see this as we go forward. A lot of it is in the key. A lot of the solution is in the conversations that we have with students, because teachers are leaders. Teachers are leaders. Does that mean that you can control the actions of students? Of course not. But as a leader, you're expected to be able to compel students without putting your hands on them. Just compel them to make a good decision. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to motivate students, you need to get them to be able to do this one thing. There's just one thing I'm going to share it with you. You need to get them to be able to do this one thing. So I have a casual relationship with music. I've got a casual relationship with music, and so this sheet of music, it didn't make sense to me. I was trying to make it make sense, but it wasn't making sense to me. And so what happened was my inclination to look at the sheet of music, it decreased over time. I said, "Oh, let me just put this away because it's not hitting me. It's not coming to me." So I think that this is a challenge that a lot of us as teachers we face when it comes to students who don't have the necessary level of motivation to be successful in our classroom. And the students that we have in our classroom, those are the students that we have in our classroom. And as we say here all the time, we will exhaust all the tools in our toolbox, and when that happens, we'll go get some more to try to help the students in our classroom. That's our belief here. Teachers are leaders, and we leave no one behind. We do the best with everyone that we have, right? So what I think happens, no, what I believe happens, what I know happens, what I've seen happen, is that many students do the same thing that I did with the sheet of music. I don't understand this. This is foreign to me. So they don't hang in there. They don't see the reason to invest the time into something that seems foreign, or they've done it before. They feel like they've done it before. They feel like they've gave it a good try in the past and it just didn't work out. So this is foreign to me. This is probably above my abilities. So there it is. I'm not gonna dig in. I'm not going to try. And this is, unfortunately, there's students in our classroom with this psychology going on in their head. And what does this result in? It results in a fixed mindset. And we gotta address it as best we can. So because it is the teacher who can compel their student to hang in there a little bit longer, to invest that time to try and make sense of what they're looking at. That's the kind of teacher that I want you to be. That's the kind of teacher I want you to continue to be. That's the highly effective teacher, the teacher who is able to do that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if a student isn't going to take step one, they're not going to take step 99 in order to reach that goal. They're not going to move far in that journey towards that goal. And then, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, I mean the goals, that's what it's all about. It's about being able to set those goals. And no, let me give it to you now, as a matter of fact. This is what I tell students. I tell students that the purpose of school, because I think it is important to understand the why. That's the beginning of, I think that's the beginning of motivation. Being able to really to kickstart motivation for someone who lacks a motivation is just to give them that why, help them to understand a why that they can sink their teeth in. Here it is. The purpose of school is to expose students to the practice of setting and accomplishing goals while dealing with resistance along the way. Once again, purpose of school is to expose students to the practice of setting goals while dealing with resistance along the way. Now, students do that in all of their classes, no matter what the content is. They set goals and pursue those goals, but along the way, there's going to be resistance. And so it's a matter of, how do you deal with that resistance? Do you hang in there? Do you strategize? Do you use feedback? Or do you quit? Do you use that as your justification to not give very good effort because it didn't work out the first time that you tried it? School's about setting goals and accomplishing goals while dealing with resistance along the way. And there will be resistance along the way, because that's just the way life works. And again, a lot of this, turning these things around, motivating students, a lot of it is in the conversations that we have, the leader that you are in the classroom. Now, let me pause for a second, and I want to insert this. I fully believe that, motivation and, the growth mindset, that does begin at home, because parents are the first teacher. Parents are the first teacher, and I think it is important that parents really fulfill their role. They fulfill their role in that area. And but again, the students that we have in our classroom, those are the students that we have in our classroom. So we've got to stand and deliver for those students as best we can. Okay, so I do believe that. Now, this takes applied effort on the part of the student over a period of time. This is very, very intense. It's challenging. And I think students understand that. And much like with me looking at this sheet of music, it was a bit overwhelming to just really look at that sheet of music and even begin to try to take it in, because it wasn't just a note. It was like multiple notes connected with these bars and different lines and just all these Italian words, and there was just so much going on. So I was overwhelmed, and my mind said, you know what, let's just relax. You don't need to do this. You don't need to spend all of this effort and tire yourself out. Let's just put this music back over here and just, just put it over there. Leave it alone, okay? So that is what went through my mind. But this hanging in there, energy, concentrated energy over an extended period of time, this is where the work takes place. This is where the progress takes place, and we need students to be able to do this. This is important. And this is also when we talk about grit. This is where that grit is just so important, because the process is not going to be a smooth one. And again, a lot of this work is in the conversations that you have with your students. Now, I talk to you, the title, it's just to motivate students. You need to get them to do this one thing. You need to get students to do this one thing, and I'm going to give it to you in just a minute. But first, let me tell you about, what I observed a lot of my students doing as a teacher when I would give them an assignment. I taught U.S. history primarily, and there would be times where, there's a section in the book that they read, and then there's some questions at the end of that section. Really nice. Check for understanding. Make sure that you understand it. Let's use this information. Let's compare, contrast, and let's see what you can make of that. And that's what the questions would challenge them to do. So, what happened a lot of times, what happened was students would write down word for word information from the book to answer certain questions, and they would hope that in that stuff that they copied, they would hope that in there somewhere is the answer that I'm looking for. And it was really crazy, because when I first started out, I wasn't sure of what to do about that, because it just seemed like all of my students were doing that. All of them were doing that. And I realized that there was this was an opportunity that was being missed by the students, because yes, I was putting together a good presentation. It was a lecture, but I was putting together a good presentation for them, taking good notes. But when it came to just additional information that I wanted them to grab themselves, and I wanted them to process themselves, like they weren't going there with me. And in addition to that, the really good presentation lecture that I was giving to students, I realized, oh, you're not even looking at these notes? How could you not be studying these notes? I would say, just give me 7 minutes a night. Just look over your notes 7 minutes a night. Now, very few of them did that. So it was even more important that they take the book work seriously, because those questions were framed in such a way that where they were at higher levels to really get them to compare and contrast and make sure that they were able to really capture that information and understand it and show their understanding, and even going further than that, being able to judge the things that happen in that chapter. So that was a problem. It was a problem, and I, as a leader in the classroom, I identified the problem and I did what I could to address it. And this is where I landed. But first, I want to give you this. If you want to motivate students, first you have to get them to do this one thing. And that is this: you have to get them to think. That's it. If you want to motivate students, you have to get them to think. Because if they're not thinking, if they don't have to think, then there's going to be some steps that are missed. If they're not thinking, they're not acquiring new information. And if they're not acquiring new information, they're not generating new thoughts. And if they're not generating new thoughts, they're not going to be able to climb those stairs in order to get from one goal to the next. Once again, if they're not thinking, they're not acquiring new information. If they're not acquiring new information, they're not able to use that new information to generate new thoughts. And if they're not generating new thoughts, then they're just going to be stagnant. They're just going to be stagnant. They're not going to move. They're not going to be able to move further along. And definitely frustration is going to sink in, because what happens is this: students grow older physically, right? That's automatic. But growing in the mind, that's not automatic. What does that take? That takes the ability to acquire new information and to use that new information to generate new thoughts, new thinking. Therefore, it's impossible to progress to the next level mentally without thinking. This is why I think this is why a lot of students who are unmotivated, they have in their mind, they've got this fixed mindset. They understand that they've leveled out, and in order to get where they know they need to be, they just aren't willing to do what it takes to close that gap, because they understand that there's just so much work that needs to be done. And we're going to get back to that. I want to address that specifically. But first, let's look at this word, think. If we want to motivate students, we have to get them to think. If we want to motivate students, we have to get them to think. Now, this doesn't only apply to the content, especially for students who lack the motivation. This applies to their situation as well. And what I mean by that is like pulling them to the side and say, "Hey, listen, I noticed that you've it just seems like you're not giving me your best. Can you tell me why?" And if perhaps that'll open. Eventually, you'll get to a place where they're open to just sharing that. I've tried. I'm just not good at social studies. I don't know. And if you can get them to open that door, then quite possibly, you can help to turn things around. Because this is what I would tell students. Going back to when I noticed a lot of my students were copying and pasting from the book. I told them, I said that words on a page will remain words on a page until they change the way you think. Once again, words on a page will remain words on a page until they change the way you think. Again, going back to what I was talking about, like there will be just this stagnation that happens when students stop thinking, when students stop thinking, when they stop acquiring new information, and using that new information to generate new thoughts. Once that stops, this is what it looks like for that student mentally. While they're growing physically, They're expecting to be out of there come what should be their senior year. Senior year, I should be graduating, while on the inside, mentally, it's like this. Because of a lack of thinking as it relates to this content. Acquiring new information. Using that new information to generate new thoughts. Let's look at this definition. To have, and this is from Webster's, I think, the 1826 dictionary. I think that was a year. Means to have the mind occupied on some subject. Occupied on some subject. Look what it says at the bottom there. These are not matters to be slightly thought on. You have to occupy your mind on this subject. To have ideas or to revolve ideas in the mind. This isn't something that can be done passively. This isn't something that can be done just like that and I'm done. I can go do whatever I want to do. And you know what? Now it's just difficult in 2025. It's very challenging to get students to do this. It's challenging, especially for unmotivated students. It's challenging to get them to do this. But remember, as we said, the students that we have in front of us, those are the students who are in our class, and we do what we can to get them where they need to be. That's what we do. And that's why I appreciate you being here, because you're doing what you can to acquire tools to help your students, not some, not a few, but all of your students. And I appreciate you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So yeah, it's challenging. And I think for a lot of students, again, it's just they've fallen behind. That's a justification to cling to that fixed mindset because either they weren't challenged to think, or they decided not to accept the challenge. Now, with that, let me clarify. I want to clarify with you here because I've been in PD sessions where it was implied that teachers were the reason why students came into classrooms not ready and they didn't have the skills that they needed. That's not me. That's not me, because I felt very offended. I felt very offended when I heard that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I believe that teachers have a job to do. Students also have a job to do. Parents have a job to do, and administrators all have a job to do. And as I mentioned before, remember I said parents or guardians, ideally those are the people who are really strong. They're the first teacher, and they're really teaching that growth mindset message and encouraging their children to think and encouraging them to grow, set goals, progress, push through challenges, develop that grit, and use failure as fire, learn from the feedback and try again. Like, that's the ideal situation. Okay. Now, I submit to you that, again, it's more about just getting students to think about the content, but it's getting them to think about their overall situation as a human being, as someone in this world who there's a purpose on their life. They may not understand it, but they have a purpose on their life, and just understanding how them attaining at least a high school diploma can factor into them getting closer to their vision of success. These are conversations that you as a leader, you're going to have with students in order to bring them to the point where they're open to thinking. Remember, again, we started this podcast with me talking about me looking at this sheet of music and being overwhelmed. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to look at it anymore because I couldn't make sense of it. But there is something inside of me. I love music. I like listening to music, and I like the idea of being able to pick up an instrument and play music. But check this out. I've had this guitar for years. And I'm not where I should be with it because I don't practice. I don't hang in there. I don't spend enough time with it. There's this lack of commitment on my part. And so I need to do something about that. I need to think differently. And so I need to do something about that. I need to think differently as it relates to me playing the guitar. I'll be honest. Yeah, I there is just this huge lack of commitment on my part as it relates to me and my guitar. So I need to think differently because I'm not going to be able to think differently if I don't if I don't put in the work, the practice, which I should be putting in. Like I know I should be putting in the practice, but I'm not putting in the practice. So that's my challenge, and I want you guys to leave comments and hold me accountable for practicing and maintaining the right kind of thinking as it relates to me playing the guitar. Okay? So here's what I want to leave you with. Again, the key here is we have to be able to get students to think if we want to begin to motivate them. And I believe that a lot of that starts with the why. A lot of it starts with the why. We got to give them the why. We got to make it make sense because a lot of students will come back to you and say, I've had this many times. They'll say, well, I'm not going to use this when I graduate. And I tell students this, perhaps you won't use social studies or American history when you graduate, but it's the way that you acquire that new information and generate new thoughts. You will use that long after you graduate. That mental exercise, the ability to think, the ability to problem solve, you are going to sharpen those skills in this class. So I give them the why. And I don't tell it to them just once. I tell it to them over and over again in separate conversations to do my best to keep them engaged, to keep them motivated. That's my job. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We need them to gain the practice of being able to acquire new information and use that new information to generate new thinking. Because when they can do that, they're going to stair step on the way to their goals. Acquire new information, use that information to generate new thinking, and break that fixed mindset. That is the goal. That is what we need to do. So you can't acquire new information by just taking a casual approach. You can't do that. And we know that, but we've got to convince our students that that is true. And if they want things to change, if they want things to finally change, perhaps there's a content that they're just struggling in, or maybe it's a school overall. If they want that to change, then they're going to have to take a longer look. And I submit to you that another good thing for you to do when you work with these students is to, and you probably already do this, is there's nothing new under the sun, but let's say you got a learning objective, perhaps for them, you pull them to the side and give them another learning objective that once they hit, then they can go after the main learning objective. Something along those lines. Give them baby steps. Give them that feeling of, ooh, wow, I set a goal and I met that goal. Give them that the understanding of that feeling. Let them feel that success, because once they feel that, they're going to want to go after that feeling again. So though, that's something else that you can do when you're working with students who are seeming they just lack the motivation. But overall, what you need to do, you've got to get them to think. You've got to bring them to the table, start getting them to think. Last thing I want to tell you is, in my classroom, when students came in my classroom, I emphasized to them that, hey, you are on a mission when you come into this classroom. What was I doing? I was addressing their mindset. I was addressing their mindset. I was stating for them the attitude that I needed them to have when they come into my classroom. So on the front of my door, there was a sign that said "Enter Seeking," and as you exit my classroom, there was the sign said "Leave with new information." Enter seeking, leave with new information. And if students were able to do that, they were able to, throughout the entire class, they were thinking, they were acquiring new information, and then they were able to generate new thoughts as a result of doing what they were supposed to do in my class. And I know this is not easy. It's not easy, but it's the work that you were called to do. Once again, it's not easy, but it's the work that you were called to do. And I know that as time goes on, you're doing the work to equip yourself with more tools to help your students. And that's why you spent the time with me here. And again, I appreciate it. So the last thing I'll ask you is, if you've got any tips that work for you, let's share with the community. Tips to help motivate students that you've used that have worked. I want you to please share that with the community by leaving a comment. I thank you so much for that. Well, that is our show for today. And as always, please don't forget that teachers are leaders.